Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've had some crazy stories about landlord-tenant problems during the coronavirus, and it's going to be a big mess when all the restrictions are lifted because there's been a moratorium in a lot of places on evictions. So people have not been paying their rent because they can't pay their rent. Landlords can't evict them, so there's kind of this weird standoff. And the question is going to become, what happens at the end of all this? What happens then? And so it's going to be strange, but we'll follow it. And I suspect it's going to vary wildly from state to state and even probably from municipality to municipality. But Jeffrey sent me a story out of Canada from the Chronicle Herald. It's very disturbing. Headline says, Halifax tenant evicted by demolition. This is according to his lawyer. Andrew Rankin wrote the story for the Chronicle Herald. A lawyer representing a Halifax man whose apartment was destroyed Friday after his landlord started demolition of the building says she's considering all legal options in response. Evicting someone by demolition, it's not something you'd see very often, says the attorney from Nova Scotia Legal Aid. It's very disturbing, and there needs to be some accountability for this. And so this is pretty much what the headline says. The man is challenging his eviction that was originally set for November 30th. He has a residential tenancy board hearing with his property owner scheduled for December 16th. Meanwhile, while he was out of his apartment building, a demolition crew was brought in and an excavator tore through his apartment and the one above it. So there is a scheduled hearing on the tenancy. And while he's out one day, somebody shows up with some construction equipment and just starts tearing down the building. The move came 2 days after his apartment was flooded, after he said a man showed up at his door identifying himself as a plumber. The landlord issued an email statement that day denying that the flooding was intentional and said that repairs were needed to the hot water lines in the apartment of the man who's complaining now. So the man was in Dartmouth at the time of the demolition, declined to comment on the situation Friday because he said he's too exhausted by the ordeal. Now, the property company that apparently owns this building has plans to replace the 3-story apartment complex with a 7-story building. Back in August, the company issued letters instead of the official form to evict all tenants by December 1st. In preparation for demolition, a metal fence was placed around the perimeter of the property on Tuesday. Halifax regional compliance officers showed up at the property at about noon on Friday. The municipality was able to get a stop work order of the demolition through the province's labor department. The order has no expiration date. The demolition continued for roughly 2 hours after the officers showed up. The attorney said the developer simply decided it would be easier to forego the legal process and proceed with the demolition of the building. Meanwhile, the tenant was asserting his right, and as a result, and quite frankly, he's lost everything, the attorney said. The tenant told the Chronicle Herald this week that he's challenging his eviction because he believes no one should lose their home in a pandemic. But he also has legitimate legal grounds to contest his eviction because he never received a notice to quit. Only several letters telling him to move out. Landlords must also obtain an order to vacate from the Residential Tenancies Board if a tenant challenges the notice to quit. So this is true in a lot of places, and especially in America as well, but also Canada, that if you are a tenant and you're renting someplace from somebody and there is a lease in place, if they want to evict you and the lease is still in place, that is, the landlord wants to evict you, they've got to go through the legal process. But if you've got a lease that says I'm here through, like, say, December 31st, you can't just evict me because that lease is a contract, okay? Now, if I don't pay rent, that might be grounds for coming after me. Or if I damage the unit, that might be grounds for coming after me. Or if I violate any other terms and conditions of the lease, such as like I make a lot of noise or weird chemical smells come from my apartment, those are things for which I can probably be evicted. But there is an eviction process. And so you usually send the tenant a notice to quit saying, we want you out and here's why. Those forms are almost always government forms, meaning that you can go to the local courthouse. And I know people who've rented things and don't know this. You can go to the courthouse and say, what do I do to evict somebody? And they'll say, there's this form. Nowadays, you can find them online. You look up notice to quit, at least it's what's called in Michigan. You get the form, you fill it out, and you serve it on them. You file one with the court if you have to. And then you go through this process, and if they won't leave and you have notified them of a valid reason that they ought to leave, then there's usually a process where you can go to court and get a court order to force them out. Now, a lot of people don't like the idea of getting the court involved. They go, do I have to hire an attorney? No, I know landlords who do this stuff as a matter of routine. It's part of doing business. They do it themselves. You don't have to have an attorney to do this, but you got to do it right. So what happens is if you go to court and you get the proper things in place, you can get a court order to evict the person, okay? And you don't go out there with a backhoe or a steam shovel or a earth mover and start knocking the building down. You literally get a court order that says a person's got to leave, and depending on the jurisdiction you're in, you get a court officer to go out and enforce it. And so it'll often be the matter where there's a sheriff's deputy standing on the person's porch with a court order, and they say, we've got a notice here, you got to be out of the house today. And they would have gotten a copy of that in time to where they could have done something about it. And so if they don't go out peacefully, court officer can drag them out. But the point is, you want the court officer dragging them out, not you. Because if you start dragging them out, you're going to find yourself with assault, battery, kidnapping, all kinds of other problems. Okay? The point is, and I've said this before, I had a law professor who would have us repeat this. Self-help is fraught with peril. If there's a legal process to do something, courts don't like to see you doing it on your own, because most people who try to do something on their own don't do it right. And so there's all these hoops to jump through. But every landlord I've known who made money as a landlord learned very quickly how these different things work. So you got to serve them with this, you wait this time period, then you serve them with this. Doesn't work, go to court, get an order, boom. And it's just part of the cost of doing business. So the fact that they sent this guy a letter, but not the legal form, and just said, oh, by the way, get out. Well, that's not how you do it, apparently. And also, it sounds like the process there is a lot like the process here in Michigan. So this is a problem. The man received a notice to quit on Thursday, the same day that the attorney agreed to represent him at the hearing later this month. And then the attorney says, the tenant is entitled to live there, and it looks like the landlord has taken matters into his own hands, ignoring the fact that there is a very simple process set out to ask for an eviction if warranted. Again, he's taken matters into his own hand. Self-help is fraught with peril. The attorney is urging the city to take action against the developer, and the mayor has now weighed in. The mayor's name is Mike Savage. Said he's very concerned by the incident. He could not explain why a demolition permit would be issued while the company hasn't followed the proper channels to evict tenants. My view is that action should not have been taken until the tenancy's process was complete. That's the mayor speaking. We didn't want this to happen. We issued a stop work order. He said that they're looking into what legal action the municipality can take against the developer. Meanwhile, the attorney said she hopes the municipality ultimately sends a strong message to the property developer. They need to make sure it does not inadvertently condone an action by a landlord that violates the Residential Tenancies Act. If the city were to allow a landlord to demolish an apartment while being aware there's a tenant in the apartment and who has a legal right to live in the apartment, but there's no order to terminate tenancy, that would be problematic. Problematic. The Herald reached out to the owner for comment on Friday, but got no response. So we mentioned a while back the story about the woman, I believe up near British Columbia, whose landlord decided to evict her. And the argument was that in an attempt to evict her, they removed the doors and windows from the house. And there was some debate about that as to whether or not the doors were removed or were the windows removed or were all of them removed. Had she paid her rent? Had she not paid her rent? But again, the making the unit uninhabitable, okay, that's key here. You're interfering with a tenancy. And so again, if you want to get somebody out, there's a legal process to do it. Now, of course, the times we're living in right now, the legal process might be delayed because of what's going on. And it's unfortunate, but that affects everybody, okay? And again, we have somebody here, they're a tenant in an apartment building. Apparently everyone else is left, but this one guy's still there. He gets a letter in the mail saying, we need you to move out. But he doesn't get the proper legal documents. And there is a legal process for doing this. And again, the saying self-help is fraught with peril. You'll notice it doesn't say you will always lose, or you'll always be in trouble, or it's always going to hurt you. Self-help is fraught with peril. You can try stuff like this outside of the court system, and it might work for you. It might. But an attorney or a judge is always going to tell you, you're taking your chances. You are taking your chances. Because if you follow the process properly, I've seen these hearings. In fact, years ago, I actually would occasionally, I've defended people in these hearings, and I've also represented somebody who was a landlord. And I've seen a judge talking to the tenant saying, did you get served with this? Yes, I got that. Did you get served with this? Yes, I got that. Okay, were you notified that this was a problem? Yes, I was. Did you cure this problem? No, I did not. Judge looks at him and goes, the law says what the law says. My hands are tied. I've got to issue this order. You're out. You're out. And at that moment in time, the landlord can then say, okay, they make arrangements and get the person out of there. And if the person doesn't want to cooperate, that's when sheriff's deputies get involved, or bailiffs, or court officers, or somebody. But the point is, you don't resort to self-help, especially when it comes to evicting somebody, especially if your idea of doing it is to bring some big old demolition equipment out and start knocking down walls. That ain't the way to do it. So from the Chronicle Herald in Canada, Andrew Rankin wrote the story. Jeffrey sent it to me. It's very disturbing. Halifax tenant evicted by demolition. At least that's what the lawyer describes it as. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. To be a champion, you have to believe in yourself when nobody else will.